I met Dr. Calwick Wilson as a provost at Oakwood University in Huntsville, Alabama. He is currently the president of the University of Southern Caribbean in Trinidad, where my husband is from. My co-host is Dr. Sheldon Akins, featured on my first podcast as an educator turned bodybuilder. However, today is here in his capacity as an educator. He has taught or led out at the high school and university level and is an author, podcaster, and motivational speaker. We are tackling a subject that I believe is a crisis in the United States and worldwide. Where have the college men gone? Is college education even necessary?
Baransu Balance Podcast with Dr. Ince emphasizes the interdependence and importance of a healthy mind, body, and soul.
Hello, welcome to Baransu Balance Podcast. Hello to Dr. Sheldon Akins from Idaho, an educator from Idaho, and my co-host for today, and Dr. Calwick Wilson, president of the University of Southern Caribbean in Trinidad. Okay, so one of the goals of Baransu Balance Podcast is to have a lively discussion and an exchange of wisdom between the generations, baby boomers and millennials. We often have different perspectives. Today we will talk about, is college worth it? And why are men not attending and completing college in the same numbers as women? Sheldon, I'd like to start off with your viewpoint. Do you think that college is necessary today?
Today, no. I don't think college is necessary. I think more the conversation when I speak with individuals about this is more of, are you going to attain gainful employment? Because sometimes you can get a college degree and come out with debt. And as a result, you might be in a position where, I got a nice job, but then I spent a lot of money paying back student loans. So for me, I kind of look at it more of, is this job or career that does it require a college degree? And if it does require a college degree, will I make enough money to be able to live a life and, comfortably? And also if I had to pay back loans, then, I'll be able to do so. Now, the caveat with all of that is, of course, if I get scholarships, grants, and all those other things, then my conversation or my thoughts would change because it's either being paid for. But if I'm coming out of pocket, I want to make sure that whatever job I get is going to pay back whatever I've borrowed. And also I'll be able to live a lifestyle where I can raise a family and things like that.
Okay, so you said you wouldn't have said that 5 years ago, and why is that? Because this is a feeling I've been getting from people of your generation, and it just goes against the grain. I mean, we've been telling our kids, you need to go to college.
Yeah. Well, me, for example, I went to college. I got, bachelor's, master's, and PhD. And I have student loans. Unfortunately, I didn't leave or exit with all those certifications without any sort of owing, the government for what I borrowed. And so, I have to pay back my student loans in addition to, again, living a life. Now, 5 years ago, I worked for a program that was a college and career access program. And so there was grant money in which we did a lot of college tours and took students around who would be the first ones in their family to pursue a bachelor's or 4-year degree. And at that time, when I was working in that position, I saw, there's a lot of opportunities for our students, especially exposing a lot of our kids who didn't have anybody else to ask about what college might be like, or even guide them through the process of filling out financial aid and scholarship applications and things like that. So 5 years ago, yes, I was all about that. But as I started to see a lot of my students go through college, a lot of them weren't prepared for whatever reason. And either they, maybe made it through the first year, or some of them did graduate with 4-year degrees, but not all of them did. And then again, as they came out, then it was a matter of what kind of jobs and careers were they able to obtain, and was that able to balance out what they, if they borrowed money or any of those kind of things. Did they get overwhelmed with a college degree, but then I'm not making enough money to be able to sustain my lifestyle? So
Okay.
again, my thoughts have changed over the last 5 years.
Okay. So we are going to move to the expert, Dr. Wilson, a college university president. I'd like to start off with asking, in your opinion and research, how is education important to your health?
Well, thank you for allowing me to join this podcast with a younger guy who has the time to move from 5 years to now. I mean, I was fascinated by your comments, and I think there is value to what you're saying, especially in the context of the younger generation who have to be saddled with lots of college debt. But how is education linked to our health? So one of the things I would say is that education policies are health policies. So I'm convinced that there's a direct link between one's education level completion, and that's going back to the issue of is college important, and one's health. We know that education is a proxy for lots of things. So, and again, I am including formal education, but certainly not limiting my understanding of education to what happens in the classroom. And by the way, I think it's the education as an institution that ought to make the direct link between the curriculum and what is needed in the industry, in the real world, so that the student comes out with a product that is of value before the person goes searching for a job. And so education, as I was saying, is a proxy for a number of health-related factors. The education, as we know, is a key social determinant of health, and also
correct.
Of mortality and longevity. The statistics are replete with information that suggests that people with higher levels of education, and it's a gradient. So individuals with less than high school versus individuals with high school completion versus some with some college versus those with completed college education and beyond, that we have compelling statistics over time that strongly demonstrates that on average, education is a social determinant, key one, of one's income, which is related to one's socioeconomic status, those variables coming together, which is a powerful determinant of people's health status. And in that vein, education is linked to health disparities. And what do I mean again in terms of education and health disparities? Because you see, education allows us to understand the impact of our health behaviors on our health outcomes. And so there's documentation, for example, in terms of risky health behaviors, such as smoking, such as other behaviors that are linked to eating and diet and therefore obesity. Education is linked to better health behaviors, which obviously are linked to one's health outcome. Education, another proxy factor is that education helps us with coping and increases our motivation to accomplish. And so overall, education is a significant factor in one's mortality and longevity, and in terms of how we deal with life in general.
Okay, so Dr. Wilson, what you're saying is that the literature, at least as of now, has shown that in the past, the additional years that you have of higher than high school education helps you economically and as well as your overall health. And like you said, in a number of measures and possible reasons, health insurance, and just information alone, which can be obtained outside of college, and there are always exceptions to these trends, but at least for now, the past literature has shown that education is helpful.
I have a question because as I was listening to Dr. Wilson, it really got my mind going. Should we maybe be a little bit more specific when it comes to the question of, is college worth it? Because as I was listening, I was like, man, he's bringing up some really good points that makes a lot of sense, especially about, you mentioned something about, your career can sometimes be linked to your level of education. So it made me wonder, like, if we just went for a 2-year degree, like maybe if I went for an associate's degree, right? Because I remember giving college tours and like, man, these kids are making 80, 90 grand fresh out of college with just an associate's degree, depending on the profession that they go into, versus a 4-year bachelor's degree. If I become a teacher, I might make $50,000-$60,000 on 4 years worth of teaching, versus if I go for a graduate school and I go for my master's degree. Does that mean that I'm going to necessarily make a lot more money because I have a master's degree, or if I have a doctorate degree? And then again, we could think of like PhD versus medical degrees versus educational. So I'm just wondering if we're too broad with that question, because like my mind really got me going as far as what is college worth it? Is it 2-year worth it? Is it 4-year worth it? Is it graduate school worth it? Is it medical degree? Is it PhD worth it? I think we could go all kind of different directions. I don't know. Just got me thinking.
Dr. Wilson, did you want to address that?
Oh yeah. And Sheldon, you got me thinking too, because I would say that in a short discussion like this, the tendency would be to be too broad.
Yeah.
I mean, so we talk in generalities and in averages, on average, in general. But I think in terms of the answer to the question, I guess my position, my experience over time, when I was younger and now I'm older, I've never seen education begging for bread. But because ignorance certainly is a very costly proposition if one looks at the other side of the coin. And what I'm convinced in my years of education is that education has to be consistent with the needs of the industries that it's trying to serve. And it's in that space, I would say, education or college is absolutely necessary. Because if you take the associate degrees, a degree option that you mentioned, and there's a lot of room for that, because there are a lot of those skilled areas that need people to be prepared to do the job before they get to the job. No, that's education. All right. Otherwise, and we can call it whatever we want to call it, but you have to go through a process of 2 years or an apprenticeship or an internship. It has to be linked to the outcome that you're trying to get. So if your outcome is to get teachers, and we know how teachers are paid, whether you have a PhD or a bachelor's degree, the educational sector is a part of the challenge, because the way we value it in the economy suggests that, you shouldn't invest in it. But think about what would happen to the economy if we didn't have teachers. So what we have to do is provide teachers with a long-term view of their investment. And so over time, while someone who starts at $89,000 as compared to someone, I use the example in terms of nursing. So nurses may start working really hard for the first couple of years, and they can make $100,000 very easily in the United States. But over time, that medical student who spent a few more years doing something and a few more years in a specialized area, over time, it pays much more than what the start line looked like. So I take a long view of education and the returns from education, because when the next generation comes, the person who was making $89,000 over the lifetime, if you look at their earnings, their growth is not really great. But the person who starts out at $100,000 or even $80,000 as an intern, but develops fellowship over time, in terms of lifetime income and returns, will have wealth at the end of the life, which is a big deal, especially in minority communities. Wealth and the transmission of wealth across generations, and not just a job in time to take care of our immediate needs.
Right. So I like what you were saying, Dr. Wilson, about looking at the long term.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, you may be able to make $20,000 a month on YouTube channel, but what's going to happen if what you're saying goes out of style? So you may say as a teacher, why should I get a master's when I'm, at least in Louisiana, getting an abysmal pay? I'm in Louisiana here. Even with the master's, it's really, really bad. But at some point, I would imagine if there was a chance for a promotion and they had the option of, okay, is the person with the master's or the person with so-called experience, they may tend to go with the person with the master's for that promotion. So I'm in the generation that says education is not wasted, but we can move on.
Okay, yeah. I'm enjoying this conversation, Dr. Wilson and Dr. Ensign. This is really good. But I think, Dr. Wilson, you have set a really good baseline for this conversation in regards to the value of college, especially like you said, the lifetime of things. So it sounds like, and I would agree, college as a college graduate, college is important, and there are some conversations that we can continue having, especially when we start to get a little bit more into the weeds of things. But we're seeing a disparity when it comes to gender. And so we're seeing a lot of our males aren't attending college at the same rate as our females are attending college. So I'm just curious, maybe based off your research and things like this, when did you start to see this trend start?
Well, I tend to do maybe an unholy, spurious correlation between a number of factors. Mm-hmm. Now, the literature is clear. In the 70s, early 70s, when there was a clear disparity, a huge gap between male and female, mm-hmm. Understandably, men were in the workforce and females on average stayed at home and took care of the family, of a job that was valued then and a job that is defined and understood a little differently now. And so by the early 70s, with a push for gender equality.
And you're talking about in the United States?
In the United States, in
okay.
the United States. Mm-hmm. And I'll get to the Caribbean if we have time. Mm-hmm. And with the change, that what we saw was a reversal. By 36 years later, you had a complete reversal. In between, of course, you had women outstripping men in terms of their participation in the education process. But by the time you get to the early 2000s, you find an alarming trend with men more likely not to attend and complete, not just at high school, but also at college. So that what's happening is that we have a crisis of men's participation in the very thing that we were talking about, in the education process and in the education lifestyle. And here's where we have compelling evidence of the value of education, because we've seen what has happened to our men in society in general, but in particular minority men, because with the increased decline of attendance and completion in educational programs, we have an increase in the number of undesirable outcomes among our male counterparts in the United States. You know, at the University of the Southern Caribbean, when I was a student years ago, there were more males in college than females. At the university now, we have 86% of our students are female.
Wow.
And 14% are male.
Wow.
And when you look in Latin America and the Caribbean, you find that this trend starts from as early as what we call in the US grade school. So pre-secondary education, as they call it in the Caribbean and Latin America. And these boys are not attending, and then they're certainly not completing. And so by the time they get to us, we have close to 9 out of 10 of our students being female.
Wow.
And just about 1.5 or so of our students being male. So you can imagine what that's doing in a number of ways to society and how society thrives with this gender inequity now that was observed for women, but is now way out of whack for the comparison between men and women.
So this discussion, like you said, could definitely go on about why. I mean, from what I understand, we had, like you said, this trend started in the 70s, way after World War II, and has been attributed to a number of reasons. And so ranging from video games to basically it's not just economic barriers, because I understand there are surveys that have asked men, you know, why is it that you didn't attend college, or why is it that you didn't finish college? And a very common answer is that they just didn't want to. Or is it because you know, they want a quick return, they want to get rich quick, and they think that college is the slow route. I don't know what the answer is, and that's why we have Dr. Wilson here. But let me ask this next question. I believe it begins with the reading gap. That's my opinion. In early childhood. Because in the olden days, there weren't all of these videos and distractions, and there were books. And maybe Sheldon can help me with this, but I don't have the male point of view. I just have I have 2 sisters, and we love to go to the library. And every Christmas, you know, my mother would give me another Nancy Drew book, and that's all I cared about. And to this day, libraries are one of my absolute favorite places, even though they belong in the museum category at this point. So, reading gap. How do we close the reading gap in early childhood, adolescence? And tell me what you think about this. Actually, I guess we can start with Sheldon, if he had any comments about that.
The reading gap, or I almost laughed when you said the olden days, because I was like, what does that mean? But I think it's interesting that I think generationally, and you know, like I'm watching my kids growing up, and you know, my son, actually I picked him up, took him to school today, and he was telling me how he spent his whole weekend reading comic books. and that's what he's been doing. Yeah, anime is his thing. So I don't know if, yes, there are video games and all those things, technology and all that, but like my son, he's 10, and he's, like I said, he spent the whole weekend. Now he's not sitting there reading, chapter books in that sense, but he is entertaining himself with, graphic novels. That's his go-to. So now you might say, well, graphic novels, and so what are they learning? What kind of content's in there? But there's still literacy skills that are being developed from that practice, from utilizing. So when he transitions to school and during the day and he's reading textbooks and things like that, he still has the literacy skills. This is news to me in regards to linking the reading gap to college, let's just call it matriculation. That's news to me. And so I'm trying. I was sitting there thinking, like, man, beyond, like, to me,
I said that was my opinion.
but my thoughts here is, as I'm listening to Dr. Wilson, I mean, just to me, just saying, look, if you're a male and you go to college, it's with 8-1. If you're looking to get married one day or something like the opportunities are there. Like that's what that was the first thought I thought. It's like, man, you're telling me that the competition is going to be like, I just need to have a pulse and be able to move and be male. And just that, to me, that would be such an awesome selling point. Just to say, listen, just come to college. You can find a lifelong partner. And there's a lot of opportunities there. I mean, men are typically, visual people. Those are kind of things that we would think about, especially at 17, 18 years old. I'll probably be thinking about those kind of things. So I don't know. I'm all over the place with my thoughts right now because this is news to me. But
yeah, so I'm a medical doctor, and people would assume that you had to be really smart to be a doctor. Mm-hmm. And I would tell them there are two requirements. One was physical endurance, be in shape, and two was the ability to read.
Yeah.
Because you can't read slowly when you're in medical school. And I mean, you've been in education for a while. I mean, what is the literacy rate of your high school students, Dr. Akins?
I mean, there's definitely a discrepancy when it comes to male and female when it comes to reading levels. I mean, especially historically throughout our Black community, for example, there's a lot of challenges there. Some would argue that a lot of those reasons are the interest, the level of interest. What am I reading? Like, what are you presenting in front of me? And is it going to be interesting to me? As I mentioned, like my son, he likes to read graphic novels, right? But those aren't going to be in his classroom. Those aren't in his libraries at his school, right? And so instead, he's having to read other books. And so I wonder if that might play a factor when it comes to the level of interest that a child might have, boys, for example, might have when it comes to reading content. We tend to look at a lot of things. As teachers, we tend to look at things that we consider classics, To Kill a Mockingbird, Romeo and Juliet, and Shakespeare's and all these things. No one talks like that anymore. Like, no one is saying thou art thine. And you know how much of a struggle it was for me to read it when I was in the 9th grade and 8th grade. Like, no one talks that way. So it's naturally not going to be interesting to a lot of people. So if we maybe focus more on presenting content, books that has characters that look like me, or plays the same type of sports, or plays video games within the books. Just different things that I'm interested in. I can probably bet that would increase a lot of the literacy skills in a lot of our boys, for example.
Okay, Dr. Wilson.
No. I think this discussion around this point is very interesting. There's some literature that links the decline in males' participation in formal education to their preparedness to be successful. And one of the factors that's linked to being prepared to be successful is your reading and your writing skills. And so I will extend the conversation by saying that we have an interesting dilemma here. We have a a lower participation of males in the household than we used to have, and that was needed. So what has happened is that the decline of the participation of males in the lives of their children is a significant factor. So there's a parental factor in terms of reading, because a lot of it is of necessity now happening in the home, because our teachers are geared, especially at those levels, to teach in a certain way that is linked to testing. And so our kids from the time they enter into a system are being ranked and tested. And those critical reading skills and writing skills, those fundamental R's, are missing in the way our educational systems are structured from early on. And when parents pick up the slack and they insist and allow and encourage and reward and motivate students to read, it doesn't matter what they're reading, but they're engaging in a skill and an experience that will become a part of their lives and part of how they function in society. They're better able to transition to the required thou art lovely and thou art beautiful. All right. So those kinds of challenges in our system would need people who understand education and able to respond to these challenges. I mean, the fact that boys take a little longer time to develop is also a factor. But what does that mean? It means that we have to do what we have done for our females that I applaud. I applaud that 86, well, maybe not 86% of them, that as many females are being successful. You know, in medicine, years ago, I started doing a study on the impact of medicine on families. And as you know, it was predicted that females will outgraduate males in a profession that was mostly males. Certain racial, ethnic categories actually dominated, but for sure was male dominated. Now, medicine graduating more females than males. Engineering studies is another area where it was predominantly male, but now females are in all of these professions. And so being prepared for success in college or in school or in primary school or high school or grade school or secondary school, or whatever term we use, is a very important factor. And the females seem to do better with less supervision than males early in life. And so reading is a skill that has to be taught. And the whole understanding of the fundamentals of literacy and phonics and how all of those things play in terms of how you make those linkages at a higher level are sadly not as dominant as it used to be when we had a different system in our households.
Okay, so before we go to our last question, Sheldon, I wanted to say that, do you think that part of the problem is that we're starting our kids too early in school? And since the males don't do as well as females at the early age, and it's almost like we're setting them up for failure by forcing them to sit still at age 3, 4, 5. And by the time they're 6, they're already labeled as being slow. I don't have any sons, but I didn't start school till I was 6 years old, and I turned out fine. So
I don't think it's too early. That's just my personal. I mean, because there's all kinds of development strategies. I mean, your early childhood programs, your 3 and 4 year olds versus your 5 and 6 year olds, it's going to look a little different. I don't think it's too early. because there's developmental skills that you're going to have. I think sometimes we tend to look at boys a certain way, and stereotype them, and group, your norms, your classroom norms might be, for example, oh, like you said, sit still or do this. But at 4 or 5 years old, the kids, they want to wrestle, they want to tussle, they want to do those kind of things. And if we create some sort of structures within our classrooms, in order for them to be able to play and engage and be themselves, but we start correcting kids at early age, and so they're told, you can be yourself only outside of my classroom and not within these walls. And so I think if we're a little bit more lenient with how we structure things so that kids can be themselves, I think that would make a difference. Christine, I'm curious, is it okay if I go to the next question?
Yes.
Okay.
We're gonna be
I think at the end of the day, I think we can all agree college has there's a lot of pros when it comes to college, but however, it's when we think about the times and how much college costs these days, it can be expensive. And then if you're going, again, 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years, 10 years, however long you're going to be in college or in graduate school, whatever it is, post-secondary, let's call it post-secondary, however long you're going to be, that can add up as well. So I guess I'll throw it out to Dr. Wilson in regards to the price tag on a college education. When should we start having the conversation that it's not worth it because of the price tag?
Yeah, I must agree that the cost of education for individuals who don't have the means is a serious barrier to their success. The financial challenges to the families and to the individuals who are trying to be educated, who believe in education, formal education in particular, is a daunting task. For individuals who went to school for those years and amass some extra income and actually devise plans because they know of these plans early on, and they're paying a few dollars. I know you're doing that already, Sheldon, and you're putting away aside money that when the kid goes to school, there's that extra sum of money there. And what you do also, you prepare your kids for scholarships. So you get them into the programs that allow them to understand how testing works and how that is factored into scholarships. And so you now being educated, and again, I'm making the point that education is a proxy for so many other things.
Yeah.
And so what you do, you train your kids a certain way, and before our kids get to SATs, you already know and understand that PSAT is what matters. And so you work with those kids to make sure they do really well. You send them to extra lessons, they practice, because these tests are practice-based. All right, so they do it over and over as a part of the curriculum, as a part of their extra out-of-school activities. And so what happens now is that these kids now get the scholarships. Now, we know of many examples where individuals go to school just based on scholarships. And for me, for example, I went to the University of Michigan, and the University of Michigan scholarship, when I calculated, amounted to over $200,000. Wow. And I didn't have to pay a penny. So I left school with a PhD with $0 of debt. And so what we started doing with our daughters is to try to get them to understand the value of this stuff. And so, yes, so on the one hand, you have those kids that are taken care of, because I would argue of educated parents who know the system, or individuals who know the system and work and is committed to the system and work the system. But for individuals who are coming to our schools, and I think about HBCUs, where the majority of our students are of lower income levels. first to attend college, as you said earlier, Shel. So one, they don't understand the college scene because their parents didn't attend college, and therefore they're unprepared to be successful. And then you have the financial burden, where they leave college with over $100,000 in debt. And then if they selected a career without matching it to industry standards and industry needs, or just the fact to go to school to get a degree, they realized quickly they have to have an advanced degree beyond college, beyond the bachelor's level. So now they're thinking of all of this debt. If I go to college now, how much more debt would I have before I start to earn? And so these kids that are coming out of these settings find themselves trapped with huge amount of debt. And so they start off in a difficult place. So it's really helping those kids to understand that there are resources available that will help them. So for example, in the nursing program, or individuals interested in biology or medical school, they can become a phlebotomist while they're in school. They can get a little certificate and do, decent wage that can be derived from some of those professions. The nursing student can be a nurse's aide and actually work on weekends and supplement the loans. So I say that the debt is a significant challenge to individuals of lower income in particular. And in Trinidad and Tobago, for example, in the Caribbean, we have, if you're from Trinidad and Tobago, then the government pays for you to attend school. That is your tuition costs and fees. But yet every year, we have students who, even with that kind of support, can come up with the other dollars just to buy food, just to pay transportation to come to classes, just to buy clothes, just to survive and pay the additional fees that are associated with their education. And they drop out, not because stop out, not because they don't have the means, but to a large extent because they don't have those additional funds. And remember, their parents don't have the kind of jobs or didn't have the kind of education to better prepare these kids for success. So I think it's a mixed bag. I'm pushing again, education, or at least knowledge of what it takes to be successful in society, and helping the kids to be prepared to do that. And there's so many examples I can share of where we are able to come up with scholarships that do exist, that these students have no clue, or when they try to apply, they are not prepared with the templates that others have to be the ones to get these awards.
Okay, well, I thank you. I thank you, Dr. Wilson and Dr. Akins. You have given us a lot to think about for our young men, for our sons, our grandchildren, and to prepare them to matriculate school, if that's their wish, with minimal amount of debt. So, thank you. Any last words before we sign off?
Well, yes, thank you again for the privilege of meeting Sheldon and for being here in this very informative discussion. I like to say, as others have said, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance. And I think education, broadly defined, is needed, not restricted to the classroom, where sometimes our faculty and teachers are out of step with what's happening in the real world. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Right. We didn't get
Pleasure
a
meeting you.
Wonderful. All right. Thank you. Where have the college men gone? This is not a healthy trend. The solution, in my opinion, is to first be aware of the problem and address the problem from the early years. And that does not mean forcing boys to sit in chairs in a classroom at age 3. In my opinion, college or post-high school education is important for socialization, long-term earning potential, for health, however, must be affordable and relevant. This is Dr. Christine Ince wishing you a balanced and healthy mind, body, and soul.